Hello, my name is Sarah Lyons, and I have a certificate in applied animal behavior from the University of Washington, and I am the fearful dog specialist at Austin Pets Alive Dog Behavior Follow Up, and I also volunteer with a group called Trappers in Austin that catches fearful dogs. And this is a presentation on bringing home a flight risk dog and what you can do to prevent that dog from escaping. So, what is a flight risk dog? Really, any newly adopted dog or any newly fostered dog should be considered a flight risk. You don't know that dog doesn't know you, you don't know what its behavior will be like in a new environment. And if you are adopting a dog from a rescue, they may not have had it long enough to really know that it's a flight risk. But the dogs I'm talking about in this presentation are dogs that are fearful, really, from the slightly shy dogs that are nervous, to dogs that could be referred to as feral, formerly stray dogs. If you're adopting or trying to rehabilitate one of these dogs, you need to be very careful because these dogs can be very highly motivated to escape and extremely difficult to catch if they do. And sometimes, people will have spent months trying to catch this dog in the first place, and then you're fostering or adopting the dog. You don't want to immediately let it go again. So, and the other category of dogs that you really want to take extra caution to make sure they don't escape are dogs with a history of being territorial, or dogs who aren't good with people or other animals, because you don't want them getting loose and causing problems in the neighborhood. So, your first job as a foster of a fearful dog or an adopter of a fearful dog, your number one priority should be just keep that dog from escaping. If the dog escapes, any other good intentions you have go out the window with the dog. And it is just very difficult to get back some of these dogs. They can run into traffic. They could just never be seen again. You don't want to live with that. So assume any fearful dog is an extreme flight risk dog. It may be that once you get to know them, they don't really have a strong desire to escape. But always start off assuming that you are guarding El Chapo and he is going to try to escape at any given moment, and you need to be on guard for that. It's very important to prepare before you bring the flight risk dog home. If a lot of dogs get loose right away, so think about it in advance. Know the common ways dogs get loose. I'll talk about that. Leave a drag leash on 24/7, no excuses, for the first several weeks. Do not take your new foster or adopted dog. I would never take a foster dog to an off-leash dog park, but don't leave them unsupervised in your backyard either. Even if you have a fenced backyard, you should be in that backyard with them, keeping an eye on them at all times. That also does not mean that they should go to apartment dog parks. Those are different than a fenced backyard, because someone can walk in at any moment and let your dog out. So I would just avoid apartment dog parks, and if you live in an apartment, always walk the dog on leash. If it's a very fearful dog, you might not even be able to do that. Make sure your dogs are microchipped and use dog tags with your information on them. An option is to have a GPS tag. Those they have to be recharged. You have to have a subscription service. It's not a cheap option. It certainly won't substitute for doing all these other precaution things, but it can give you a little peace of mind and help if your dog does escape. The most important thing is probably as soon as you get this dog in your possession, and hopefully the rescue that this dog is coming from will have done this for you, but the dog should be wearing a martingale collar at all times. The normal collars that you get at a pet store, any dog can back out of those if they want to. and you really can't make them tight enough to prevent it unless the dog has a really big head and a really skinny neck. They just back up, put on the brakes, pull back, and it goes over their head. So the Martingale collar is the kind of collar with the extra loop that you can see here in this picture that tightens when the dog pulls backwards. So it should be somewhat more escape proof. When My Rescue sends these home, they fit the collars for the fosters or adopters. It should be fitted more snugly than the Martingale documentation says, just so that it's not so tight when it's there's no pressure on it, but when the collar's flat, it should be fitted so that you can fit two, when the loop is flat, you can fit 2 fingers underneath comfortably. Many times, adopters or fosters just want to get their new dog a new collar as a, gift, or just they want something quirky or cute, and you should really resist that and keep the Martingale collar on for a minimum of 2 weeks, and if you do replace it with a Martingale collar. Your dog should also have a drag leash on, and if you are getting a feral dog, and you've trapped this dog, the first thing you should get is a Martingale collar and a drag leash on this dog, and leave that on for at least 2 weeks, if not longer. A drag leash is just a lightweight leash, regular leash that the dog drags around 24/7. It's just left on their collar. They drag it behind them. That's why it's called a drag leash. And it can help prevent escape because you actually have a chance if the dog is running out the door to step on the leash. The other thing that is very useful for is if someone comes to the door, it's very easy to get control of the dog before answering the door. Otherwise, you may be chasing this dog around the house, and meanwhile, somebody's coming in the door, the dog bolts out the door. So a drag leash is also just a great tool all around for fearful dogs. It's really helpful to have. I would venture to say you're not going to make any progress with a very fearful dog unless you have a drag leash. So it also helps capture a dog because it's very hard to grab a loose dog. Grabbing a loose dog could end up with a bite. So the drag leash at least gives you a chance to capture them if you can get close enough to them. Some dogs will chew through regular leashes, and if they figure that out as an option, you just basically have to get a chew-proof leash. So the best, I think, are sort of lightweight chain leashes. You can also use a cable tie-out. One of these, it's a metal cable with plastic around it, like the top 2 in this picture. There are some cable leashes that you can get online. I personally, for walking, the cable tie-outs do not work well as leashes. For walking a dog who chews through a leash, I generally use a chain leash. And then after the dog has accepted the chew-proof leash, you may be able to transition them to a regular nylon leash using a bitter apple or no chew kind of spray on the leash that discourages chewing, but that probably will not be enough on its own. You have to get them used to the leash first and get them over the idea of chewing through it first. So when do dogs escape? We have identified the volunteer, the rescue I work with keeps a log of, every foster dog and adopted dog that escapes and how it happened and the most common causes of where they escape. One of them, unfortunately, is just on the way home from the shelter or on the way from the foster's home to the adopter's home. Person just puts them in the car, they get to their destination, they open the car door, the dog bolts out. So it's very important to secure the dog in the car every time you transport them. first most obvious thing, don't transport in the back of a truck. Keep the windows closed, but also attach the dog to some fixed object in the car, like having a leash that connects to the seatbelt attachment. You can make a very simple solution is to make a slip knot out of the handle of the leash and put that over the headrest. If you have a second person who will hold on to the leash, that will work, but make sure that you don't open the car door until, unless it's secure, the dog is secured, and then you have the leash in hand before you release them from whatever you have. The most secure way, if you're talking about a feral dog or a former stray dog who is not leash trained, and is, a super flight risk, the only secure way to transport them is to put them in a travel carrier inside the original location, like the shelter. Carry the dog in the crate to the car, carry the dog in the crate from the car into the house. Don't open the door until, the doors are closed to the house and you've got them where you want them. That's really the only, foolproof way to transport them. And the other thing is, once you have this dog, if you're going to a vet appointment, you're going to a groomer, you're going to a boarding place, talk to them about the fact that this is an extra flight risk dog. Don't just assume that they'll take all the precautions in the world. Let them know that this dog is a flight risk. Talk to them about what they're going to do to prevent, how you're going to do the handoff. In pandemic times, a lot of vets are doing hands-off in the parking lot. That might not work for your dog. You might have to have the crate carried into the vet's office. The one of the places that dogs frequently escape is on walks. And now, if you are getting a very fearful, formerly stray dog and you have a house, you may be able to just take them in the backyard for potty breaks until you've got them more acclimated. But at some point, you'll want to take them for walks. If you live in an apartment, you may have no choice but to take them out on a leash. And what happens is the dog gets spooked and yanks, and the person is distracted and they yank the leash out of their hand, or the dog backs out of their collar, because even martingales are not 100% foolproof, or the dog will chew through the leash. And also accidents can happen where the person will trip and they'll drop the leash, and that will spook the dog and they'll take off. So this is the number 2 cause that we saw of dogs getting lost. Basically, if you don't know how they're going to behave on a leash, if you don't know whether they've ever been on a leash, don't take them out on a walk until you know that, and you may have to practice inside. For people in apartments who are adopting a dog that's very fearful and not leash trained, you might have to have a backup plan. That might involve putting the dog in a room with potty pads and keeping them inside using a patio or something like that until you can get this dog to the point where they're manageable on the leash and you can handle them safely. When you do take the dog for a walk, put your wrist through the leash handle and grasp the leash. Do not hold it in the middle of the leash, or you will get horrible rope burn when that dog tries to yank it out of your hand. Use a martingale collar, of course. But some dogs, as I said, they're not 100% secure, so some dogs may need a harness and martingale combination, and then you connect the two with a carabiner. And please, never, ever, 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 ever use a retractable leash with a fearful dog. What happens is those cases that the retractable leash comes in are not easy to hold on to. People drop them all the time. They get yanked out of your hand, and then the dog thinks this loud plastic thing is chasing them, and they run without thinking. They can run into traffic. They will run for hours, running away from the sound of that plastic handle chasing them. It can get caught up in things, and they can get trapped. It's ended horribly too many times. Retractable leashes are not appropriate for fearful dogs for a number of reasons. And then if the dog chews on leashes, if they chewed on the drag leash, just use a chain for walking them. And here is a picture on the left is what I mean by putting your wrist through the handle and grasping it. That's pretty safe. If you stumble, you're not likely to let go of it. And a waist leash, sometimes called a jogging leash, I would use that as a second leash. So you can have one leash attached to the collar that's just a regular leash, and then a second leash maybe attached to the harness that is a waist leash. This is what I was talking about. For small breed dogs, especially, collars are not that great because, especially if they're not leash trained, they can choke themselves and crush their trachea. Some dogs are just too, squirmy. They can get out of the harness, the martingale. Maybe their head is about the size of their neck, so the martingale isn't going to be secure enough. The most secure arrangement is probably to have a harness plus a collar, and then attach them with a carabiner, which is this like hiking tool that you can get in sporting goods stores. And then attach the leash either to the harness or to have one leash attached to the harness and one to the collar. Do not attach the leash to the carabiner. That isn't secure. But this way, if one of those two things fails, the other one should still be on. For small dogs, the harness may not be secure enough, but having it attached with the collar should prevent them from wiggling out. Okay, so the number one way that dogs escape is just bolting out the front door of the house or apartment. Lots of people already have dogs and they think, well, I know how to keep a dog from going out the door. I always kind of block it with my leg. I, use caution when I open the door. That's not enough for the dogs we're talking about. These dogs, it's hard to convey how fast, how strong, and how motivated some of these dogs are to escape. And until you've actually had a flight risk dog, you just can't imagine. So the safest thing to do is to, it's important to think about this before you even bring the dog home. You may need to do some setup in your home. The safest thing would be to have a physical barrier that prevents the dog from accessing the front door. So that could mean a baby gate in a hallway that prevents them from accessing the door. There's a kind of baby gate that's sort of freestanding, called a hearth gate or a fireplace gate, which this picture is of. The two ends can attach to the wall outside the door, and that way you can create an airlock where you open the gate, walk through it, close the gate, open the door, walk through it, close the door, and they don't have access to the open door. Again, leave the drag leash on at all times. This allows you to get control of the dog before you open the door. If you cannot put a physical barrier, you just need to make a household rule for every person. Everyone has to agree. Every time the front door does not open until someone is holding the drag leash, the dog is closed in their crate or in a closed room without access to the front door. And that you have to think about people coming in from work, people coming home from school. You might have to put a sign on the door. You might have to have some communication with the people inside, saying, knock on the door and we'll let you know when you can come in. Do not let your guard down. If you brought home this dog and it is just sitting in one corner and you think this dog doesn't want to escape, it doesn't even move, do not think that you are safe. That dogs are opportunists and they can sit there for weeks at a time just not looking like they're going to move, and then they see an opportunity and they will fly across that room faster than you could possibly imagine and muscle through your legs and get out the door. The long-term solution is to teach the dog a door routine where every time it goes, out the door for a walk, you ask the dog to sit, you wait for eye contact, you wait to free it before it goes out the door. But that is a something that takes some time and, you know, a lot of practice and repetition. You need to prevent escape before you work on that. And the final way that dogs escape is from the backyard. No yard is escape proof. It doesn't matter if your other dogs haven't escaped. They may not be that motivated to. A dog can dig under a fence in less than a minute. So when you first bring the dog home, even in your fence yard, hold on to the leash until you see what they're going to do. If they are, you know, checking all the fences, looking for the door, you may need to hold on to that leash for a long time. You might get a long leash so that you can give them more freedom. Never leave them unattended in the yard. And by unattended, I mean you have to be in the yard and you have to be watching them and not let them walk over to the side of the house. Before you bring them home, check for gaps, weak spots. Dogs will chew through weak spots sometimes. And then block off before you bring them home access to any inaccessible hiding places. If the dog, you know, goes under the deck and won't come out, you don't want to have to dismantle your deck to get this dog out. So, just to reiterate, some of the tools that you might want to have. A martingale collar is an absolute must. Drag leash is extremely important. Crates are great. Scared dogs usually like crates. It's a great way to, you know, contain your dog safely while you have people coming in and out. Baby gates, pet gates, as I mentioned. An X-pen is another kind of barrier that you could use to kind of contain the dog, putting them in a spare room when you need people to go in and out. And in extreme cases, you may need to set up puppy pads in a spare room if they're just not safe to take outside yet. If your dog does escape, this is the final thing I'm going to say, do not chase or call after your dog. Everybody wants to do that. That's the natural response. It's very hard to resist. Try to resist it because if the dog bolts out of the door and you chase after it, chances are you're not going to catch it unless it's, you know, in a sort of contained area that it's running into. Unless you run 20 to 30 miles per hour, the dog runs faster than you do. Calling after the dog will just make it run faster. Even if this dog loves you a lot, they go into flight mode, they just run. So don't chase, don't call. Instead, most dogs who run away, even if they run away from somewhere they've never been, like you're bringing them home from the shelter for the first time and they bolt out the door, they will circle back to the place they escaped from if they are not chased. So try to make a clear path. Don't have people standing around that will make it too intimidating for the dog to come back. Leave open the gate, the garage, your front door if possible. Immediately put out scent items, the dog bed, something that smells like your other dog that this dog likes. Food and water. You want to keep the dog coming back. And if you have security cameras, point them at the food and water and the scent items. A lot of times dogs will be running around during the day, escaping from people, being spooked by things, and then at night they'll try to sneak back to the house. So it's good to have cameras so you actually see if that's happening. Post on Nextdoor and whatever local lost and found Facebook pages, groups and things like that. Put up posters, big posters everywhere. Notify the rescue you got the dog from. They may help. If you're in Austin, contact my group, Trappers. We can give advice and we can help actually capture the dog if there are sightings. So that's it. Thank you very much for choosing to foster or adopt a fearful dog, and I hope this will help you never have to deal with the hardship of them getting loose.